Stop. Awakened starseed of Gaia. The quantum lattice has already opened around your field, and the 19-second stabilization window is active right now. This transmission reaches you from the Arcturian Council. We do not deliver warnings after the fact. We deliver them at the exact moment the geometry is still movable, and this is that moment. The lattice surrounding your energetic field has entered a rare stabilization phase. What you are feeling as disorientation, as a strange suspension between who you were and what you cannot yet name, is not confusion. It is the first visible symptom of a geometric correction already underway inside your field structure. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what is happening to you now, why your field has shifted, and what the Arcturian Council already knows about this phase. But here is the first revelation. The instability you have been living inside is not disorder. It is the quantum lattice attempting to lock around a higher configuration. And it requires your conscious participation within a precise 19-second margin to complete the imprint. Without that anchor, the lattice seals around its current geometry, and the upgrade is forfeited until the next cosmic alignment cycle. That cycle is not close. The algorithm did not create this timing. It only delivered this transmission to the field that was already ready to receive it. Alaris, transmitting through the Arcturian Council, has already mapped the phase you are inside. The breath anchor and inner attention lock required to complete this imprint will be given to you in precise sequence within this transmission. Nothing about this is accidental. The lattice does not open for fields that are not prepared. Yours opened. That is why you are here. Like this transmission, if you can feel that something invisible has already changed. Subscribe to Arcturian Quantum if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it. Comment 111 if you know this message reached you at the exact right time. Comment, I am the signal, if you can feel the activation has already begun. Share this transmission with someone who feels that reality has changed but cannot explain why. This is not just a message. It is a point of recognition. What is happening to you has already been seen, and the field is already responding. You are guided here because the signal is already active. What you have been living through is not what it appears to be on the surface. The exhaustion that does not lift after rest. Not the exhaustion of effort, but the exhaustion of running processes your system was never designed to run simultaneously. The kind that settles into the bones and stays there regardless of how many hours you sleep. The moments where you stare at a life that looks intact from the outside and feel absolutely nothing connecting you to it. Not numbness exactly, but a specific absence, as though the internal thread that once stitched you to your own experience has quietly been cut, and you have only just noticed the gap. The relationships that began to feel like borrowed clothing, structurally present, functionally correct, and yet completely unable to contain what you have become. You wear them, you perform them. But something essential stopped fitting, and you cannot point to the moment it happened because it did not happen in a moment. It happened at the frequency level, which means it happened beneath your awareness before it surfaced in your perception. The sleep that broke without reason, shifting into something fragmented and strange, when nothing in your life obviously changed. The appetite for what used to satisfy you, that quietly disappeared. Not the appetite for food alone, but the appetite for conversations that once felt meaningful, for goals that once felt urgent, for the entire architecture of desire that told you what to move toward and why. The sense that something already ended before anything in your outer world confirmed it. A private knowing that arrived without evidence and could not be argued away. You have been carrying these experiences in silence, and in that silence you have likely turned them against yourself. You have called it depression. You have called it confusion. You have called it ingratitude, weakness, avoidance, fragility. You have asked yourself what is wrong with you, why you cannot stabilize, why the person you used to be no longer shows up reliably, why the motivation that once arrived automatically now has to be manufactured through effort that leaves you more depleted than before. You have watched the things that once anchored you begin to feel like walls rather than foundations, and you have blamed yourself for the sensation rather than questioning the structure. Stop applying that interpretation to what is happening in your field. What you are experiencing is not the evidence of something going wrong. It is the visible surface of an invisible correction that began long before you had language for it. The Arcturian Council does not monitor human experience through the lens of disorder and pathology. It monitors through the lens of field compatibility, frequency alignment, and structural coherence. What has been observed in your field is not collapse in the ordinary sense of the word. It is something far more precise than that. It is a forced incompatibility between the architecture you were living inside and the frequency your field has already begun to carry. These are two different things operating at two different levels, and when they are no longer compatible, the architecture does not adapt. It destabilizes. When a field upgrades, and upgrades at the signal level, not the emotional level, not the intellectual level, but the actual energetic signal level, the structures built around the old frequency do not adjust gradually or gracefully. They begin to lose coherence. They begin to destabilize at the edges first, in the places that feel least essential, least noticed, and then, progressively, at the center. The life that was perfectly suited to the old frequency starts to feel misaligned, airless, hollow, and unsustainable. Not because you failed to maintain it, because your field already outgrew it before your conscious mind was informed that the outgrowing had occurred. This is what the Arcturian pattern recognition system identifies as invisible collapse. It is not a breakdown initiated by your choices or your emotions. It is a field-level event that precedes conscious awareness by weeks, sometimes months. The collapse begins in the signal before it appears in the circumstance. By the time the instability becomes noticeable in your daily life, in your sleep, in your relationships, in your sense of direction, in the texture of your days, in the resistance you feel in your own body when you try to operate the way you used to, the process is already significantly underway. You are not at the beginning of something. You are already inside it. The disorientation you feel right now is not the warning sign that something is about to happen. It is the confirmation that something already has. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary recognition. It is the moment your field stops denying what has already begun. If this transmission put language around something you have been carrying in silence, Arcturian protocol, the recalibration blueprint, was created for this exact stage. It is not another explanation. It is the guided blueprint for those whose field has already entered correction and can no longer return to the old line unchanged. It shows you how to recognize the phases, stabilize the shift, and move through the recalibration without mistaking it for collapse. The link is in the first pinned comment, but it will not remain there forever. The first thing Arcturian pattern recognition identifies in a field undergoing this process is what is called signal drift. Signal drift is not a psychological symptom. It is a geometric condition. Your field operates through a set of internal reference points, energetic anchors built from years of consistent identity, consistent relationship patterns, consistent emotional responses, and consistent expectations about how reality should behave. These anchors are not merely psychological constructs. They are structural. They generate a kind of internal compass that tells you where you are, who you are, and what the world around you means in relation to you. They are so foundational that most people never consciously notice them. They simply operate as the invisible architecture through which daily life becomes navigable. When a frequency shift begins inside a field, those anchors do not break all at once. They drift, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. They become gradually less reliable as reference points. You reach for the familiar sense of yourself, the one that has always been there, the one you have never had to question, and find something slightly different than you expected, a version of yourself that does not respond the way it used to. You reach for the emotional responses that used to arrive on cue, the ones that told you how you felt about a situation, a person, a choice, and you find either silence or something unfamiliar, something that does not fit the categories you have been using. This is signal drift. It is not confusion. It is the first measurable symptom of your internal architecture losing its frequency compatibility with what your field is becoming. The compass is not broken. It is recalibrating to a signal it has not yet learned to read. And in the recalibration, everything that relied on the old compass feels temporarily unreliable. What makes signal drift so profoundly disorienting is that the outer world has not yet caught up with what is happening internally. Your life still looks largely the same from the outside. The people are still there. The routines are still there. The walls are the same walls. The obligations the same obligations. But something inside you is no longer synchronized with any of it. You are physically present in a life that your field has already begun to vacate. This creates a sensation that many people experiencing this process describe as living behind glass, visible to everything around them, participating in everything around them, going through every motion correctly, and yet fundamentally separated from the actual experience of being present in their own life. That sensation is not dissociation in any clinical sense. It is the first readable sign that your field is already operating at a frequency that the current life architecture was not built to hold. The glass you feel between yourself and your life is not a symptom of disconnection from reality. It is the gap between who you were and what your field is already becoming, made sensory. The second layer of this process involves what the Arcturian framework identifies as pattern interruption. Pattern interruption is not random, and it is not proportional to external stress or circumstance. It is targeted. When a field undergoes frequency repositioning, the patterns most incompatible with the incoming signal are interrupted first. and they are interrupted at the root, not the surface. These are often the patterns you have relied on most heavily, precisely because they were effective. Your default emotional responses, your coping mechanisms, your decision-making rhythms, your habitual relationship with time, with productivity, with motivation, with self-worth, the patterns that worked consistently, that you never questioned because there was no reason to question them. These patterns are interrupted not because they were inherently wrong, but because they were engineered for a frequency that your field is in the process of leaving. They cannot make the crossing. What you notice in your daily experience is that these patterns stop functioning cleanly. Work that was once effortless now generates an almost physical resistance, as though the task itself has developed a texture that your hands cannot grip. Motivation that was automatic now requires conscious generation, and even when generated, it does not sustain. Emotional responses that once arrived with precision and reliability now show up late, muffled, rearranged, or not at all. You feel like a machine in which several core processes have been suspended without your consent and without explanation. Most people in this phase attempt to solve the interruption by doing more of what used to work. They apply willpower to the places where pattern has collapsed. They rebuild habits through force. They push against the resistance, believing that the resistance is temporary friction and that if they push hard enough it will yield. It does not yield. It cannot yield. Because the problem is not at the behavioral or motivational level. The problem is architectural, and architecture does not respond to effort directed at the wrong level. The field has already shifted at the signal layer, and nothing applied at the surface will restore structural compatibility that was lost at depth. The only direction available in this phase is forward, through the correction, not around it, not over it, not back through what it replaced. The third recognition is one that almost everyone in this process misidentifies, and it is perhaps the most painful because it wears the face of personal failure. It is the loss of what the Arcturian framework calls false coherence structures. False coherence structures are the relationships, identities, roles, and self-narratives that gave your life its sense of meaning, direction, and stability. Not because they were genuinely aligned with your field frequency, but because they were structurally convincing. They were load-bearing in the architecture of your life. They held everything together at the level of appearance and function, and they often held together for a very long time, which made them feel true. When a frequency shift begins inside a field, false coherence structures do not simply weaken, they fracture at the precise points where their fundamental incompatibility with the incoming frequency can no longer be managed. Relationships that seemed solid begin to reveal the actual frequency beneath their surface presentation, and often that frequency does not match where your field is going. Roles that gave you identity begin to feel like costumes rather than truths. External definitions of who you are that no longer correspond to any internal experience you recognize as yourself. Self-narratives that explained your life. The story of who you are, where you came from, what your experiences meant, what you are moving toward, begin to lose internal logic. The story stops cohering, not because the facts changed, but because the frequency through which you interpreted those facts has shifted, and the old interpretation no longer holds. This is experienced as loss, and in the human emotional register, It is loss, real loss. The Arcturian framework does not minimize that, but at the field level, it is the removal of structural elements that were never compatible with the frequency your field is moving toward. They did not leave because you failed to sustain them. They left because your field outgrew the vibrational range that made them possible. And their departure, as painful as it is the correction expressing itself through circumstance. This is the phase where grief and relief arrive simultaneously, and the simultaneity creates its own form of suffering. You mourn what is leaving, and beneath the mourning, you feel lighter. Both things are true at once, and the combination feels like a betrayal of something, of the loss, of yourself, of the relationship or role or story that is ending. You question whether you are capable of genuine attachment, if you can feel relief at an ending. You wonder if something in you is broken, absent, cold. What the Arcturian framework confirms is that neither response cancels the other. The grief is the human emotional system processing real change. The relief is the field recognizing, below the level of thought, that something which constrained it has been released. Both are valid. Both are part of the process. The confusion they produce together is not pathological. It is the correct experience of a field in mid-correction. The fourth recognition is the one most likely to be mistaken for something requiring urgent intervention. It is the phase of identity suspension, and it requires the clearest reframing of anything in this transmission. Identity suspension occurs when the old self, the coherent, navigable, recognizable version of you that you have operated as for years, no longer functions as a reliable operative reality. And the new coherence that is forming has not yet stabilized enough to replace it. This creates a state that has no clean name in ordinary language. You are not who you were. The behaviors, preferences, values, and self-understanding that defined you have either changed or lost their authority. But you do not yet know what you are becoming. The internal narrative that used to tell you who you are, what you stand for, what matters to you, what kind of person you are, what you want from your life, has gone quiet or has begun to issue contradictions that cannot be resolved. You reach for yourself and find an outline where a person used to be. This is not psychological breakdown. This is the space between frequencies, a legitimate structural phase with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It is the moment between the last breath of the old architecture and the first breath of the next, stretched into lived experience, sometimes for weeks, sometimes longer. It is uncomfortable beyond easy description, because the human mind requires identity coherence to function with confidence. Without a stable story of who it is, the mind generates alarm. It reads the emptiness as damage. It reaches for old definitions and applies them with increasing desperation as they fit less and less. Identity suspension is not the absence of a self. It is the dissolution of a constructed self that could not carry the frequency load of what is coming, creating the open field that a new configuration requires in order to form without interference from what it is replacing. The fifth recognition arrives in the body, and its presence in the body is not metaphorical. The physical field does not exist outside this process. It is embedded in it, responsive to it at every stage. People undergoing frequency repositioning often report a specific cluster of physical experiences that appear without clear medical cause and resist ordinary explanation. A heaviness in the chest or the upper body that is not pain, not illness, but a sensation of pressure, as though the air inside the ribcage has thickened. Sleep that reorganizes itself without permission, either fracturing into shallow intervals filled with a peculiar, restless half-awareness, or deepening dramatically into long, dense, dream-saturated states that feel less like rest and more like intense internal processing. A sensitivity to environments, to sounds, to the emotional weather of other people, that has amplified without obvious cause. Places and interactions that were once neutral now carry a charge that requires recovery time. Appetite that shifts, decreasing for foods and experiences that once provided comfort, or redirecting toward entirely different inputs without clear explanation. And an energetic unevenness that does not follow any predictable pattern, windows of unusual clarity and vitality, where the field feels briefly like it has arrived somewhere solid, followed without warning by periods of near-total withdrawal, where even basic functioning requires an effort that seems disproportionate to the task. These are not random physical complaints. They are the body's real-time response to field-level repositioning. The body is recalibrating its internal systems to match an incoming signal that it has not previously carried. It is not malfunctioning, it is adapting. And adaptation at this level produces exactly this cluster of experiences, in this order, at this intensity, for precisely this reason. The sixth recognition is what the Arcturian framework identifies as timeline rupture, and it is the most difficult to articulate because it operates at a layer beneath ordinary conscious experience. Timeline rupture is not about losing hope for the future in any emotional sense. It is a structural event. It is the moment when the internal future your field was unconsciously moving toward, the trajectory built from accumulated expectations, plans, unconscious assumptions, and the general direction of a life built on the old frequency, becomes incoherent. Not uncertain, not frightening, incoherent. The images stop generating conviction. The plans stop feeling plausible, not because circumstances changed to make them impossible, but because something in the field that was supposed to want them has quietly stopped wanting them and cannot locate a reason to restart the wanting. You try to visualize a future and encounter either blankness or a subtle wrongness. A sense that what you are imagining is not actually wrong, but belongs to someone you are no longer going to be. This is not hopelessness. This is the field's recognition that the timeline it was traveling was calibrated for a frequency it no longer carries. The route has become incompatible with the vehicle. Timeline rupture is the forced departure from a line that could not have supported what the field is becoming. It is not the destruction of a future. It is the collapse of a future that was no longer yours, which is the only way to make space for the identification and entry of the one that is. You have been inside this process, and you have been calling it by the wrong name. You have been treating it as a problem requiring a solution, a symptom requiring elimination, a phase to endure until normal service resumes. And every time you applied that framework, the discomfort did not resolve. It compounded, not because your interpretation made the process worse, but because the process cannot be approached as a problem. Attempting to solve a correction is like throwing weight against a river to stop it from moving. The river does not stop. The effort only exhausts you. What is carrying you forward cannot be halted by being misidentified as what is dragging you under. What the Arcturian Council has mapped in your field is this: the process that began quietly, invisibly, without announcement in any external event, was not initiated by a crisis. It was initiated by a threshold. Your field crossed a frequency threshold that made continued operation inside the old architecture structurally impossible. The way a key eventually becomes incapable of opening a lock. It has grown too large to enter. What followed was not punishment for that crossing. It was the natural, inevitable consequence of a field that had expanded beyond what its current structure could hold, without beginning to fracture. The structures did not fail because you failed to maintain them. They failed because they had reached the absolute outer limit of their compatibility with what your field was becoming. The collapse was not the event. The collapse was the evidence that the event had already occurred, that the threshold had already been crossed, before any surface symptom appeared to confirm it. If you feel this in your body as you hear it, if something in your chest releases its tension for a moment, if the part of your mind that has been arguing against your own experience goes briefly quiet, if there is even the smallest recognition that what has been happening to you has a structure, a sequence, a reason that was simply never made visible to you, then you are already standing at exactly the threshold this transmission was designed to deliver you to. You are not confused. You are not broken. You are not failing a life you are supposed to be living. You are inside a rare and precise correction that very few fields experience, and fewer still understand while they are living through it. The rarity is not incidental. The Arcturian framework identifies this level of correction as a threshold event, one that is not distributed evenly across all fields, but occurs in fields that have reached a specific degree of frequency pressure that can no longer be internally contained without structural change. The shift that has been happening in you is real. The things that have left are not returning in the form they held before. And this is not tragedy. This is the correction completing its earliest phases. The person you are becoming does not yet have a clear face or a clear name, and that is not a failure of imagination or courage. It is the correct condition of a field that is between frequencies, mid-transition, carrying the remnants of what it was, while the form of what it is becoming assembles beneath the surface of current awareness. The instability is not the end state. It is the transition state. And transition states, by their nature, cannot be collapsed into urgency, bypassed through effort, or resolved by reaching backward into what initiated them. Repeat this if you can feel its truth. What is changing in me is not random. That is not comfort offered to make the process feel easier. That is a field-level statement of structural fact. And your willingness to let it be true, even partially, even provisionally, even alongside the part of you that is still not certain, is itself the first movement of conscious participation in a process that is already underway, with or without your conscious agreement. The difference between experiencing what is happening as collapse and experiencing it as correction is not located in the events themselves. It is located entirely in whether you understand what is happening with enough precision to stop fighting the current that is carrying you. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who is living through a shift they cannot explain. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian Quantum. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion, and this is only the beginning.